This is another fantastic time of the month for Macabre Monthly. I am Matt Orozco. I am always joined by my good friend.
Lowell Greenblatt. Hello, everyone, all four of you, whoever.
Yeah, all the 34 subscribers to the channel. We can't wait to introduce our Patreon. But you might notice there's a third window in our Zoom call today, and that's because we're joined with a special guest.
Hi
Paul.
everybody, I'm Paul. Yeah, sorry, didn't know if that was the cue. I'm Paul Drechsler-Martell. Excited to be here, quite honestly.
Oh, we're excited to have you, Paul. So,
Cool.
Lowell, why don't you help? I know you and Lowell know each other, but I don't know the full story here. So, um, Lowell, why don't you give us a little insight into how you and Paul got to know each other?
So Paul and I were roommates at college at SUNY Purchase, and it was my junior year, and we just got to talking about movies. He had a lot of martial arts movies, and a VHS of Mortal Kombat Annihilation, which made me go, I wonder if this was as terrible as it was when I first saw it in seventh grade, if it got any better. And it did not. But we bonded over our love of WMAC Masters. And I found out that there's a new book that's an oral history of it that just came out through Paul, which I picked up. But yeah, Paul was always interested in stunt work and martial arts, and he would go around campus dressed as a ninja, making slapstick comedy movies, which I saw and were really funny. Also, we went to an art school, so someone walking around campus dressed as a ninja and making short movies wasn't that strange.
You're also in New York, which that happens
It was
Yeah.
also like 2006-ish or 2005, and I feel like that's when like the Ask a Ninja YouTube was really popular, and just like ninjas were big in pop culture at the time too.
they're coming
Yeah,
back. I think that was on the time the Scott Adkins movie came out too. So maybe he's the driving
Yeah, yeah,
force
yeah.
behind this.
And you had like Ninja Assassin and stuff like that. Oh yeah, yeah.
God bless him. He's doing the Lord's work. But yeah, so we graduated, went our separate ways. I did hear after graduation that he was in one of the films on your shelf there, Paul, Plague Town, directed by David Gregory, president, I believe, of Severin Films.
Yep.
And I saw that and I was like, oh, damn, good for Paul. But then years later, I'm watching Netflix. I'm watching Daredevil season 2, the very first episode, and there he is in close up, and I'm like, Paul, and then he gets murdered by the Punisher. And I'm like, wait a minute, that's Paul. And then I looked on IMDb, and even in 2015, dude, you had a resume, and you still have a resume now. But I was like, oh my god, he did it. Paul became the stuntman that he wanted to be. Oh, and also junior year, I was in the Conservatory of Theater Arts and Film, and I had to make an audio documentary for one of my classes, and I had absolutely no idea what to do. Like I wasn't even that into documentaries at the time, not like I was later. And I remember a story Paul told me. Paul, you're a New Englander, and he was Robin in the Batman and Robin Six Flags stunt show, and he broke his neck when he fell off the Batmobile.
Holy shit.
And fine, but I was just, but like I interviewed him and I turned it into that, and I used Danny Elfman's Batman score. Not legal at all, but not selling it. So yeah,
He's got
so
that
I
Oingo Boingo money. He'll be fine.
yeah, he's good. He's good. So yeah, but I still have that on a disc somewhere. But yeah, and then I ran into Paul this September, or rather, he ran into me because he saw me from across the way at CT HorrorCon on the line, and he's like, "Hey, are you in Connecticut?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I am." He's like, "I'm on the line," and we like waved at each other and talked on Facebook Messenger until we could meet up inside, and it was hilarious. And then I was like, "Hey, I do this with my friend Matt. You have actually done stuff. Let's talk." And here we are.
How much
And
is
here
all
we
that
are.
true? Is all that true, Paul?
Most of that is true. Yeah. I mean, I don't know. My
Oh,
resume could always be nicer, and I have a herniated disc in my neck. I don't know if that quite counts as breaking, but yeah,
oh, oh,
pretty close.
that's how I told it to my teacher, so it doesn't matter. I got the grade. Yeah.
As
Yeah.
someone with a herniated disc in their lower back, that I think that counts as broken. You know, it's a
Oh,
pain.
yeah.
It's pain. So
Yeah.
I feel you there, but maybe not in the same way. So as you know, if those couldn't, if those watching couldn't pick up that Paul works in the stuntman business, and I think Lowell was not underselling your resume, Paul, because when I looked at it, I'm like, oh, it just keeps going and going, and oh my God, and I've probably seen you get like punch thrown, you know, multiple times without even realizing it. So wow, it's just great to have a chance to get to talk to you and ask you some questions about not just your experience in the industry, but also we're going to talk about our topic this week, which is or month rather. We don't do this weekly, but hey, that's okay. Maybe someday. Is top 5 horror stunts, which is going to be interesting to talk about because I don't know about you, Lowell. This was really hard to try
Yeah,
to
this
bring.
was harder than usual, but it was kind of fun to do. It's like
It
I had
was.
like, definitely three and like one movie where I could have picked any number of stunts, but rounding out the five, I was like, I just made work for myself and for you guys. So thanks.
Yeah, I'm excited. I almost want to like blast through the interview so we can get to the top 5 stunts because I just had so much fun. And especially, I mean, we'll talk about more, but like horror's not my genre. So I was just like trying to YouTube tons of stuff, and got to what I had time for. But like I can't wait to hear what you guys have to say too, because I'm sure some stuff's gonna be like out of left field, some movie I've never heard of or something. I just have so much to say when we get there.
Oh,
Nice.
I was a little intimidated to be honest. I'm like, well, I'm not sure what if I'm considering things stunts that are actually stunts or not. You know, like I was being because when you try and my process to peek behind the curtain here is super scientific. I go on Google and I Google the topic and then I try and use that as like, oh, that's an idea. I'm not going to use that movie, but that's an idea. It helps me jog the memory. And when you Google like top horror stunts, all you get is a bunch of special effects makeup work, which is like great, but I don't know about, the rest of the group, but I'm like, that's not the same thing as a stunt. Like that's an art in and of itself, but that's not necessarily that can work with a stunt, but that's not necessarily what I was going for. It's more like what is this real life action that is almost beyond belief, in most cases is, right?
And I will say, separate, like, I don't know where it landed for you guys, but I made a conscious choice not to pick fight scenes because I want to do top five horror fight scenes, like horror movie fight scenes as a separate topic. So I really just tried to consider they got a double for this, or maybe they didn't, but it was just like an effect that they really had to prep and do over and over again,
Well,
and not someone in.
yeah. I'll say 2 things real quick to just that. Yeah, I mean, it's tough because and even I reached out to some horror friends to get some ideas and the ball rolling. And it's funny, some of them came back with I'm like, okay, that's not a stunt, that's an effects thing. Or
Mm,
maybe it sounds interesting, but it's something that they did with effects so that the actor could perform the stunt. Okay,
doesn't.
maybe kind of depends. And it's almost the behind the scenes and how they created it is the cool part, not necessarily the stunt itself. At least was the approach that I had in hearing some people's ideas.
Yeah.
So that was at least my reaction. And then what was I going to say, Lowell? Oh well, one thing I'm excited about, and this comes up all the time with stunts, is stunts is actually pretty vast. I mean, we could be talking and not to get into it too much, but we could be talking about high stunts falling off a building. We could be talking about fire. We could be talking about fight scenes. We could be talking about vehicles, which might include boats or planes. Like we could be all over the place. So and I mean, which sometimes makes it hard. It feels like an apples to oranges comparison when you're trying to pick a best, but also it just makes for a range of topics.
It's also we have an additional struggle with modern films in that there's so much blending of the digital and the real now that,
Mhm.
in some cases, and I know we do see this with like how they treat they don't, digitizing bullets now and things like that is more of a risk factor. It's an insurance it's a financial decision more so than a safety one, of course, but like a financial and safety decision. But it does, in turn, like set a different tone of what we can actually read as a stunt. And people not if you're not a stunt person, like I feel safe in saying I'm not. Um, I just like, we have so much to learn. So I'm excited, just as probably much as you are, Paul. And I'm so glad Lowell kind of and you reconnected to have this conversation. But before we get too much into some questions for you, because we have many, one of the things we love to do when we start the show is to catch up on what we've been watching. We spend a month apart from each other. We're states away. You just want to know what kind of trash and treasures have you found? So, given that you're our guest today, is there anything you've watched recently you wanna share or talk about? And bonus points if it's horror.
Got it. Well, yeah. I mean, I feel like what I'm currently watching, I don't necessarily have a lot to say about. Honestly, I'm doing I mean, I watch a lot of martial arts movies and a lot of action movies and a lot of Asian cinema, especially. So I'm doing a Sonny Chiba rewatch right now of just select titles, which is fun. And I just signed up for China has a couple of its own streaming services. The sort of Netflix of China is iQIYI. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. But they just released essentially their version of John Wick. It's called, depending on the translation, it's called Desperado or Thug in Suit, something like that. But something I would rather talk about, I think that's a little more horror related, was around Halloween. And again, it was Halloween, and I was like, I'm in the mood for something spooky, and I tried to get recommendations from people that um, I watch Hong Kong movies with or that we discuss. And I was like, does anybody have a good recommendation of a good Hong Kong movie I could watch for Halloween? And the one I ended up picking that a lot of people recommended was this movie called Haunted Cop Shop from 1987. Are either of you guys familiar by any chance?
I'm looking it up right now because
Yeah,
I watch a lot of Shaw Brothers, like Hong Kong, like horror stuff, like Seating of a Ghost and Boxer's Omen. So, what would you
judging
say
by
it's called again?
Haunted Cop Shop. So it wouldn't be Shaw Brothers, and it's a little bit later than that, kind of like than your Boxer's Omen stuff. What was it? And I'll talk about it for a minute while you look it up. So, and one, I mean, it was good, and not only was it good though, but there's so Hong Kong movies were made cheaply and quickly. That's the other thing. They would just like work round the clock for like a month to things that in the States we would consider labor issues by like not letting people sleep, and they just film like a 48-hour film fest for 30 days. But
Cynthia Rothrock has seen some shit.
What's that?
Yeah, Cynthia Rothrock has seen some shit.
Oh yeah, and same. Yeah, and same. I was listening to a Cynthia Rothrock interview that just sort of reiterates this other point, which is that they also typically they didn't have scripts. I'm a little confused on how they have a credited writer most of the time, but they don't. Apparently, they filmed a lot of the time without a script. Which, so a lot of the time when you watch a movie, it's pretty uneven. It's not uncommon for you to feel like we get this comedy that comes out of nowhere, and then we're back to a drama for a bit, and then we just kind of you get this sense that it's like what they were feeling on the day. And I wasn't there, so I don't know, but you get that kind of feeling to come through. And or like Cynthia Rothrock, I was listening to a commentary she did on a film, and she said, at one point they said, "Oh, just look up," and like they didn't give her any context of what was happening, and so she does just kind of look up, and like aliens come down, and she was like, "I would have reacted differently if you told me the opposite shot was aliens." Like,
Yeah, right.
but instead, I just so same kind of thing. So I guess sorry, where I was going with this Haunted Cop Shop, what was nice was it did feel like it was pretty. It comes and goes a little bit. It loses focus in a way that you kind of tend to expect. But considering like some of these movies can really feel like you're watching 3 or 4 different movies in 90 minutes, it is a real pretty steady. We're doing horror comedy. The premise is it's a police station that used to be a Japanese nightclub when Japan was occupying China, and then everybody there like committed suicide of some form. So obviously it's haunted by their ghosts. But it was just really, I was surprised. It's director Jeff Lau, who's a really prolific Hong Kong director, but it was actually his first movie, which kind of surprised me by how good it
Hmm.
was. I was like, wow, this is his first one. Yeah, it was just really solid, and it wasn't. It's not heavy on. Yeah, I would say it's heavy on horror comedy elements. It wasn't particularly heavy on action for anybody who was looking for that. It did have a fight scene in the middle with a guy named Chung Fa who does a lot of Sammo Hung movies. And there was a decent fight in the middle, which was just sort of a nice change of pace to it. But yeah, highly recommend that
Oh, I'm definitely adding
Cool.
that in the rotation. It's got a great cover art too. It looks like Police
Yes.
Academy with blood dripping down it.
Right. It looks like Police Academy. It's like, and I think it's the two leads in the front, and then everyone back in uniform is like a ghost or something.
Yeah, and just the premise, right? Like a nightclub full of people that committed suicide is now a police station. It's something that I wish our Western minds would go to these reaches of
Yeah.
creativity.
Well, it feels like it wouldn't be that hard. We've sort of done, if you want to Americanize it, we've done plenty of sort of
Ghost
horror
Ship,
on.
like something like that.
Sure, or well, yeah, exactly, for premise wise, and also I was going to say it's sort of like haunted, former uh indigenous people's burial ground, and then we
Yeah,
put a police station on top, there you go. But yeah, this sort of
it's
nice
true.
contained ghost story.
That's awesome. Well, I'm definitely adding it to the list. Where did you how did you watch it, by the way?
I think I had an old copy from YouTube, but
Okay.
I will say that, and I don't think it's on YouTube anymore. But I am now like scouring. I think there's a couple places you can find a Blu-ray, and I think it's worth picking up the Blu-ray, honestly. I don't think it's like a recent boutique release. I think it's one of those you'd have to buy the Blu-ray from Hong Kong, but I think it's pretty easy to find.
Well, is it fair to say that I'm going to make an assumption here, but will validate it that you have some experience in a time where maybe you couldn't just go like where there weren't as many boutique labels, and if you wanted to get like a good Hong Kong action film, you had to know somebody or trade with people, or have someone that could import it, things from outside the US.
Yeah, I never did a lot of, say, like the trades. I think occasionally, I mean, I miss very much. I would just go to Chinatown in New York, especially when like Lowell and I, were at Purchase. It was easy just to go to New York Chinatown, and I miss that very much. I was pretty good at. There were a lot of different websites where it felt like you wouldn't really find it on Amazon
Yeah.
at the time, or if you did, it was like $100.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it was like once enough people shared, what websites sold kung fu movies, and whether they were bootlegs or whether they were legitimate releases. Yeah, like I used to order from Yes Asia a lot. I still order from DDD House a lot.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a far easier world to access cinema than it's ever been. And I think with a lot of boutique labels, if you're looking for something to bring out, maybe Haunted Cop Shop is I mean, it would fit totally nicely in at least three other boutique labels repertoire
Oh
at this
yeah,
point. So
yeah. It's a shame there's a lot of rights issues with a lot of those Hong Kong classics, which is why you don't see them released on boutique. It's the short
uh,
version.
oh, cash rules everything around us. Well,
Yeah.
uh Lowell, what have you been watching?
I rewatched Thanksgiving on Blu-ray because I bought it and it's great.
Still
Next,
slaps?
we Paul, we love Eli Roth's Thanksgiving and we've just been talking it to death. So just moving on to the next one. I got a screener for a film called Out of Darkness, which just came out, which is speaking of Native American people, it's set 45,000 years ago, and it's a small tribe of early settlers looking for a home in a land which appears to be barren and dangerous. And there may be something out there that's trying to kill them in the dark of night. And it's fantastic. It's already one of my favorite horror movies of the year. It winds up with a bit of a social message at the end without spoiling anything, but like it's not Prey, it doesn't quite go where you think it's going to go, but it's just fantastic. The cinematographer is the guy who did Saint Maud and the upcoming Love Lies Bleeding. He works with Rose Glass, and it was just like really, really cool. I'm already hoping that this year is better than last year when it comes to horror. Um, Not that last year was too bad, but considering 2022 was just an onslaught of amazing stuff, I was found wanting a little bit, but I think we're on the right track. Out of Darkness, very good. I reviewed it for the site, and also I'll just mention that I got my friend's Paramount Plus. I mean, excuse me, I subscribed to Paramount Plus, and because they have Nickelodeon stuff, I've been rewatching Are You Afraid of the Dark, which I hadn't seen in forever, but it was one of my favorite shows, one of my gateways. And I actually found that a few years ago, someone successfully kickstarted a book that's like an Are You Afraid of the Dark compendium. And he did art for it, and he has interviews with the creatives, and he like recaps episodes. But it came out on Kickstarter with a limited run a few years ago, and you can't get the book physically anywhere now. But I reached out to him for an interview, which we're going to do, and he's hoping to bring it back to physical form to be able to sell it in stores. And I got a digital copy of it that I'm reading now. But yeah, Are You Afraid of the Dark? Like, dated, obviously, because it is the 90s, painfully Canadian, which I never noticed. And like, good on them for like being able to conceal that, because I had no idea. But yeah, my favorite episodes still slap, I have to say. So
Zeke the plumber or something like that?
no,
or...
that's your shorts. You shut your mouth.
Oh, there
you
we
don't
go.
cross
Okay.
streams. You're thinking of Zebo the Clown, maybe.
Yeah, there we go.
Yeah.
But I mean, I have bootlegs of Are You Afraid of the Dark because they
Hold
weren't
on
this
to
big.
them.
Yeah, I had them
Because
for like 5 years ago, and they're like, because I knew that like there's some things like it's the same with like the Beavis and Butt old episodes with the music videos in them. We're never gonna get those because of the music rights issues. So like the good people on the internet have found ways to preserve history in the most meaningful way. So I'm just gonna hold on to it and make like 10
yeah.
copies and just put them in
And
time capsules.
honestly, I'm glad that I was able to watch it on Paramount Plus. Paramount Plus kind of sucks in some regards. They don't have all the episodes of Are You Afraid of the Dark? They don't have all the episodes of Daria. It's weird. Like, I'm not getting rid of my Daria DVDs anytime soon, but it's just kind of strange what they keep and what they don't. But at least I was able to watch some of them. So that's what I've been watching.
Love it. Love it. Well, I've got just a few. So one of them is one we talked about last time, but I hadn't watched yet. It was Satanic Hispanics.
Oh,
I really
yeah.
like this. I liked it quite a bit. In fact, I think it is probably one of the better anthologies to come out in the past 10 years at least. Um, it's not, every anthology has ebbs and flows. This one is no different, but I think the overall, like, overarching story is quite good. In fact, I think it's probably one of the best kind of bookend stories. And yeah, I was pleasantly surprised by it. We did a review for it for the site. And then there seemed to be on like a south of the border kick as far as anthology films go, because I also watched Mexican Barbaro 2, which is an anthology film I had not heard of. I think it came out in 2017, or at least that's when it was kind of making the festival run. It may have taken this long to actually get real distribution. I don't know, but it's picked up by Unearthed Films, and they put it out back in January of this year, and it's also really, really good. I will say, if it weren't for one story in there, this would almost be like a perfect anthology movie. Um, Not to say that every story is great, but like there's enough good stories. Like when I watch anthologies, I actually do rate them by the story, and I do an average of all those totals to tell me whether or not this is a good anthology movie.
That's smart.
And this one has one 5 out of 5, one 4 out of 5, two threes. It also has 7 or 8 stories in it. They're also like microfilms, so I think actually works extremely well for an anthology in that it doesn't have the chance to overstay its welcome because everyone gets 15 minutes. It kind of felt like what the vibe was. So I do recommend it. There is one story in there that it made me viscerally mad because it's so bad. Like, and I don't mean bad like they didn't try or anything. It just wasn't for me. Like the aesthetic, it's this blending of like pop-up ads and like porn, and I'm like, I don't find this to be entertaining at all. So anyway, no flowers for that one. And then have
Was
you
that
ever
the
had
one
a
Outlier? Sorry to interrupt. Was that the
yeah,
one Outlier? So like all of them solid except for that one.
Yeah, in fact, that was a 0. Like I actually put a 0 on it out of 5 because I'm like, I got like angry watching it because I'm like, I don't know what you're trying to say to me. Like, it's kind of like it's almost like when you're trying to speak with somebody else in a language you don't understand. You're just like, you're getting frustrated. Like, I don't know what you're saying. And like, you need to, so I just was like, I really, I didn't love it. Let's put it that way. But I appreciate the effort to try. Like, it wasn't like it was low effort. It was more just like, I don't know what the point of this is. And it's disrupting this good time I'm having. Someone just, farted in the room and now I got to wait for the smell to clear out kind of thing. So, um, anyway, have you ever had a movie that you've kind of held on to for a while and you've not watched, but people have told you it's very good and like for whatever reason you just don't get around to it, but then you do, and everyone was right?
Yeah.
Yeah. The House with the Laughing Windows is this one. So to round out my Giallo January, my friend Max had gotten me this DVD like 3 or 4 years ago. Um, and they only have it on DVD from Shameless out in the UK. But the good thing about all DVD players nowadays is they're all region free for DVD at least. Um, I finally popped it in, and it's more horror than Giallo, which I think is why I really, really liked it. But it's not only a coherent story, but it's genuinely fucking creepy. So high recommend if you can find it. I think there might be some YouTube rips out there, or again, the Shameless DVD you can get for I think less than $20 probably. So a worthwhile investment to be sure. And I've been watching Fargo. That's a great
Oh,
show.
so good. I actually rewatched the movie because this season is so good, and it's a perfect film. Just
Yeah,
no
I
notes. But
I rewatched it a couple of years ago. My wife had never seen it, and so she got to watch it for the first time. And I was still just like, man, this is so good.
yeah,
it's amazing how they're able to capture the entire tone of the movie in every season of the show. And it doesn't get old. It always feels like, wow, this is but I watched it backwards. I started with the first season a long time ago, loved it, forgot about it, didn't watch anything else, watched the fifth season. I don't binge watch shows, but 2 days. I finished the entire thing in 2 days. John Hamm's a real piece of shit. I feel like that is real John Hamm too. Like I don't know the guy, but maybe
he
that's really
wears
how
that
he is.
well. But I
Like
don't
those are
believe
probably his real nipple rings. I'm just saying, like you don't, who knows? But anyway,
possible.
no hate to John Hamm, just maybe. But so that's what we've been watching. Anything else?
I don't want to go on too much of a tangent, but I just read recently. I mean, how do you guys feel about I forget the character's name. Sorry, I'm going back to Fargo the movie. Was it
Okay.
Mike Nagita
Mike
or something?
Nagita, no, that scene is necessary, and anyone who tells you differently is selling something. You
What
need that because you need it for her character growth, and also he's just like it's a weird, awkward, funny scene. Like it works, but you need it, or else she just goes home and like believes William H Macy, and that's the end of that.
that
Yeah.
was essentially what I was going to say, which is I only, after hearing that for so long, that this character is great but unnecessary to the rest of the story, was I found after the rewatch with my wife, I found some article that was like, because you'll still find internet articles that say the same thing. You don't need the scene, but exactly to your point, Lowell, was that it was like no, it gets her to question that people are not always truthful and 100% honest with you, and I had lived that lie interpretation for a while. So I was like, oh my God, you do need it. Great.
I have a strong I haven't watched the movie recently enough to be able to weigh in on this per se, but I genuinely believe that the Coen brothers are efficient filmmakers. So I feel that they get I have a hard time not being biased against them because most movies they make are under 2 hours and they are really well told stories. I mean, No Country for Old Men's a 90-minute movie and it feels like it happens in a flash because you're just like, whoa, this movie fucks like right away. And it's wildly in the performance they get out of people. I mean, I could go on all day about how we need to go more to the Coen brother way of filmmaking, be more efficient, shorter movies, better told stories. But I'd be preaching to the choirs, I'm sure. Um, but we do have some time, to talk about you, Paul. Well, first and foremost, like, give us a little bit about Paul. You know, how did you end up in stunt work based off of the when you and Lowell departed purchase?
Yeah, well, I mean, I'll loop it back even just for a second. So I grew up doing martial arts and taking karate lessons, and I very much wanted to be, you know, as a child of the 80s and early 90s, wanted to be a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle and a Power Ranger, and that was the attraction to probably the martial arts, really, but then also to stunt work as well. And then Lowell mentioned WMAC Masters, and this is a thing I bring up a lot, which was that when that show was popular, which I want to guess is like 95-ish, when that was on, he and Nguyen, what's that? Oh, sorry, I didn't know if you were correcting the
Uh,
date, Lowell.
Oh, no. Yeah, maybe 95, 96. That sounds about right.
Yeah,
But he was either Superstar or Tsunami or Warlock.
Tsunami.
I forgot. Okay, one of those.
Yeah. So he and Nguyen was Tsunami, and he actually, well, I don't know if he grew up in Connecticut, but he was had a karate school in Connecticut that he taught at, and when the show was popular, he went and did a seminar, and you know, it was like big and publicized, and so I went as a kid, and and I had a blast. And it's like all the kids naturally sort of wanted to be, you know, you sort of got partnered up, and all the kids wanted to be like throwing the kicks and the punches. And I wanted to be taking the kicks and the punches for, you know, a couple different reasons. One, I just thought it was fun and I liked it. But also, I was like, well, we kick and punch in karate class every day. This is where the pretend, this is where the special part is happening. This is where the imagination is happening. You're not actually hitting me, but I'm pretending. And I loved that. And that's where I was like, oh, and I was kind of good at it, you know, for a kid. And so I was like, oh yeah, that's what I want to do. So I think the year before, right, the year before Lowell and I were roommates, I had, in sort of slowly doing that pursuit, I had spent a summer as Robin, well, as part of a summer as Robin at the Batman stunt show at Six Flags New England. And then I got hurt during rehearsal and was in a neck brace. So I did not finish the summer. But and then, so let's see, I was very fortunate that actually, let me backtrack a little bit. When I was in high school, I was reading Black Belt magazine, and they had an ad for like a stunt camp, and I told my parents I wanted to go. It was like a week intensive or something, and it was in upstate New York. It was run by a guy named Michael De Pasquale Jr. And my parents were like, "You didn't really go to summer camp much as a kid, so sure, it's kind of expensive, but sure." And so, one, that gave me a ton of training, and even we would just they would spend a few hours telling you what a demo tape should look like, how to read a call sheet, the sort of how to what headshots you need to get, things like that. You know, in addition to exposing you to other stunts and things of that nature and other skills. But Mike was also a manager, and so like a month after I did that stunt camp, he called me for audition for a Nike commercial, which I ended up getting. Still don't know how that happened, but
wow.
and then ironically, and it was funny because it's this kind of thing that happens a lot when you perform, which is like super psyched and told everybody it was going to play, I think, during Thanksgiving. You know, it was this football commercial, and then, you know, never saw it, and then and it never appeared, etc. And then I was telling somebody about it like a decade later, and they're like, I saw that on YouTube. They're like, yeah, it's like this, that, and the other. And I like found it. And then it was directed by Rupert Sanders, who went
Oh,
on to do, yeah.
he's doing a
Um
pro movie.
he
That's
he did the Crow movie that comes out this year. Yeah. And he right, exactly. And he did, what was it, Snow White and the Huntsman or whatever it's called?
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Scarlet.
Um
Yeah.
yeah. Because I think I still had the call sheet, and that was the only way I knew how to like look it up. But anyways, that got me that, even though the commercial never aired, it got me my SAG card, which was all thanks to Mike. And I always have to throw that out there because I'd literally be nowhere without him in that camp.
Wow.
And then, right, I did the Batman stunt show, and I didn't join SAG right away. I was so young. My parents wanted me to go to college, etc. You know, and but I did eventually. I was the way stunts works a lot. Sometimes there's auditions, but they're pretty rare. and it's more of a networking thing, and it's more of a thing where you get directly hired by the coordinator. So it's a lot of networking and relationships, which I was slowly building up. And then in 2014, I had met these guys, the Harvey brothers, Bob and Greg, who recommended me for a job where they needed someone skinny to double a teenager for Blue Bloods. So I did that, and I was still SAG eligible, and so I was like, oh yes, I am in the union, and I just paid my money and worked the day, and then was fortunate enough for that to snowball. It also, I was very fortunate in that it snowballed at a time when New York got very busy, because my first union, that Blue Bloods episode was 2014. Right around that time, we got Gotham, which just burned through stunt people constantly. I was fortunate enough to
In a
work on
good
that
way?
show. Oh yeah, no, nobody's
Okay.
getting hurt. Sorry. Let me also phrase, yeah, and not that people are getting burnt out. Burned would be an industry phrase of when you get used up. So it's like, oh, we can't use that guy. We saw him in the last episode. You got to
Okay.
find us somebody else. And so it's just, when you hire, I don't know what numbers they did, but when you hire, close to 20 people an episode, and you only have,
Wow.
And then I'm just estimating here, but you only have 100 stunt people. You're like, well, it's episode 6, and we've used everyone. Now what do we do? And then it's like, well, I've never heard of Paul before, but like, he's got credits. Get him in here for something easy that won't
We're
get
out of
anybody hurt.
wigs. Yeah.
What's that?
We're out of wigs.
Yeah, exactly. Right. We're out of wigs and faces. So, and then after that came those Netflix shows helped a ton. The Marvel Netflix shows, granted, long story short, they were terrible contracts, but
Mm.
they were, I mean, because they were usually filming 2 of them at a time, at least, and then they would film 2 at a time while we had all the other New York shows going. And shows like Gotham also running, and Blacklist is a show that would hire a lot of people. So I was very fortunate in that I turned SAG at a time when then all of a sudden locally it got very busy. And one of the advantages if you were new like myself was those Netflix shows often would, and not always, but would often hire a stunt coordinator who's not from New York. So they were kind of coming in with a little bit of a clean slate, in that they didn't know, they didn't necessarily know how inexperienced I was compared to somebody else, or how, experienced that other person was compared to me. Obviously, they do their due diligence to a degree, but it's like, we're both strangers to them.
Yeah.
So it gives me, not necessarily an advantage, but a little bit, more so than I might have otherwise. So that was very lucky, and sort of, I mean, ideally, a lot of stunts is on reputation. And so, if you don't do a good job, people pass that knowledge around, and then you work less. And if you do a good job, people pass that along as well. And hopefully you work more if the opportunities arise. So that's essentially that's essentially how those credits got built.
That's amazing. Well, we got some other questions for you here. I mean, as far as like, the different genres you've worked in, based on your experience, is there different approaches that different coordinators will take based on the genre, if there are different demands, or is it pretty, pretty plug and play as far as like, oh, we just kind of need someone to do this. We can, it doesn't matter if it's a horror movie or an action movie or a rom-com. We just need someone to be able to do this flip or this, this fall this way. So is
All
there
right, we
any
need you
difference there?
barrel to a half sack and then toe splitter. You got that? Good.
Right.
That kind of, that's it. That's how I imagine stunt talk would be, even though I just totally made all of those up right now. So I think, but yeah,
That it's funny, that's not been my experience, but someone told me a story recently where that was pretty much what it was. And it was on like one of the John Wick movies, where they pretty much more or less little sounded just like what you said. And they were just like, why don't you guys do that later? But no, to your point. So I was thinking about this a little bit, and to be honest, I don't really know how it relates to horror, and not because I haven't worked in horror, but I think if you think about horror as a genre, it's so it really depends on the tone of what you're going for, because it's like if we're doing like a vampire movie, those in most vampire movies, I would imagine it's going to be a much bigger sort of theatrical kind of thing versus if we're doing, I mean, I don't know if Get Out is a good example, but maybe Get Out where something, or maybe Barbarian, where we're sort of trying to be somewhat in reality, and how that performance is different. The one that comes up more conversationally stunt wise, because I just feel like horror is on a spectrum in that way. But
Mhm.
what comes up a lot for us is, so again, in New York, there's a lot of TV shows and it's a lot of cop shows. Blue Bloods, Law and Order. We just had Blacklist just ended. Uh, FBI. I think we have at least. I think right now we have like at least 3 Law and Orders and 3 FBI's, and those obviously aim for a more realistic kind of, nobody gets shot and acts like it's in a Western and does a big dramatic thing. But the folks that work a lot, compare that to, then you get hired to work on Daredevil, and it is a comic book show. And so it is, a much bigger, more theatrical kind of thing. So, I mean, I can't speak as much to the coordinating and the design, but from friends of mine who work more than I do, can say like sometimes they do sort of have to adjust. They're like, I've been throwing superhero punches for 6 months, and I have to remember that I'm on the Equalizer now, and this needs to be more toned down. It's that kind of thing.
Cool.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you want to ask another question, Matt? Because I totally forgot the rest of the questions. I don't know
yeah,
why
for sure.
we're going to be asking these, but this might be. Yeah. Okay.
No, I can keep going. So I mean, as far as like stunt work, is there something that's misunderstood about it? That, as far as what people's perceptions of what you do versus what you're actually doing?
Yeah. Well, I mean, the reality is there's probably more sitting around than people realize. But I think not even so much what we're doing, but I think there's sort of, there's the stuntman stereotype. And you will find some people, but this idea of some people being sort of adrenaline junkies, or particularly the idea of some people being, reckless. Those folks, obviously, it's like if you're on a movie set, not really. It's all about safety. Everything is about calculated risk. There is a degree of which, I get really excited and the adrenaline and the endorphin goes up and everything, but it's not as much, this sort of reckless stereotype. Or then you get some
There's
people that kind of,
there's no guy walking around and everyone's like, oh, that's Chauncey. He's freaking crazy. He'll light himself on fire right now. You got to see that.
Right, exactly.
That was in the 70s, but not.
Right, exactly. Yeah. Or it's like, right. It's like, don't invite Chauncey on this one. He needs to get out of here so bad. It is, you sort of see that play out a little bit. I think it's kind of realistic in that Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, when, Brad Pitt's like not supposed to be there. And like, yes, it's for other reasons, but it is like, no, like that's more of a realistic thing. It's like, no, I don't care how good this person is. I don't want them around. And that's where, some of the more reckless folks, particularly I think if you're sort of that stuntman stereotype, and then you get on set and continue to behave that way, the word travels around, and then you work a lot less because for those exact reasons. Yeah.
I mean, it's a huge risk, right? I mean, I think we saw what happened with Rust and Alec Baldwin, right? And like these things, like, when you don't take the right measures, bad things can go wrong. And it does, like you said, Hollywood's a business. So, and risk is a part of running a business, and you have to manage your risk accordingly. So you're not paying out, massive insurance settlements. And at the same time, you don't want to have a reputation for having an unsafe set where people get hurt, So it makes complete sense why safety is a priority, and that, maybe the perception of this kind of wild person, unkempt and kind of living vicariously through whatever happens next, is really just kind of the opposite.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, sorry, I was trying to think of, I had sort of 2 main points. I couldn't think of the other one. And the other one is the idea that stunt people don't get afraid. And I mean, that depends on the person, but I've heard, from people who do much bigger stunt gags than I do, I've listened to a lot of interviews, and it's like I know a number of stunt performers who are afraid of heights that do high stuff all the time.
Hmm.
And but the idea is like you would think they're not afraid, and it's like no, in fact they are petrified. They just are the type of person that will sort of not let them that stop them in the moment when they need it. And I've listened to a lot of stunt interviews, and a lot of the time, sometimes they'll be like, I had to do this big gag. I was scared out of my mind for this and that reason. And then almost if you think of like a gymnast performing, where sometimes between sets they're just sort of like, and
Yeah.
then they just go for it. Like and it was funny because I was listening to a stunt podcast for a while, and I noticed that was a pattern that everybody was like, I was scared out of my mind, and then when I had to do it, it was like all of a sudden everything became clear, and I did the thing, and then and then I went back to being like, holy shit, that was scary. But yeah, that this idea, this absence of fear, I mean, it's less about an absence of fear and more about how you deal with said fear.
Yeah, I think that's when it separates it, right? It's like, they talk about with people being able to power through versus, what lets you kind of take you. And I guess we could all be stunt people if we learn how to power through, but we all may not be good at it because we may not have the acumen or the training. And on the note of that, people that may not be good at stunts, you work as a double to other actors. And I was curious about the relationship you have. What makes a good match with an actor when it comes to being their double?
I mean, there's little things that go into it in terms of sort of, I mean, typically you try not to bother the person, but you do sort of try to at least observe and sort of get a sense of their mannerisms and how they're playing the character and how they're walking. It can be a tricky balance because sometimes it will be expected that you are like right next to your actor to give them water or pads or whatever they need. And then other times it's like very much leave that person alone.
They're
And
doing their thing.
that is a balance I struggle with figuring out right away. I sort of am like, which are we doing? Because if I leave them alone the whole time too, that's not always what they want either. Um,
Right.
yeah, I will say though, and this, we'll probably talk about a little bit more, but as so I am what most people would refer to as a day player, which is somebody who sort of comes in, works for the day and leaves, and that's kind of it. And I'm not and I don't work a lot of big movies or anything. So the experience that I have is not, say, when you read about Scarlett Johansson and her stunt doubles for Black Widow, really sort of like designing the Black Widow character together and how that character moves, is definitely a part of stunt doubling. When you're up on that level,
Sure.
I'm not. So I, for the most part, am just sort of showing up, trying to observe what are we doing. He keeps moving this way and that way, so I'll be sure to mimic that, and then I go for the day. And it's not a it's less of a partnership in that way, but that's also because we're often doing TV and we're just going. Sometimes I don't even see the actor or meet them,
Right.
in any way.
Well, that's a skill to be able to show up, knock it out of the park, and then go. It may seem to some like maybe it's like a small cog in the machine, but small cog falls out and the whole thing like falls apart. Like
And
that's a valuable thing that you do.
no, and I mean, I think it's something we don't often think about is that there is a transactional element to stunt work that doesn't necessarily lend itself to the same experience you'd get when you work on a big feature. So the work on television, might be a bit more turnaround, whereas, movies you might be more on set for extended period. And kind of brings in my last question for you, which is really just about, as far as the work goes, what are some of the best things that what keeps you doing what you're doing? And at the same time, what are the things that make you think to yourself, oh my God, why did I choose this career?
Well, what's funny as far as the like, I mean, I love it. And even just, I think we're all sort of, lovers of cinema here. So, I mean, I get excited just when I show up and the camera's there and the lights are there. And I love when you look through the lens and it looks totally different than what you're seeing in front of your face without the
Hmm.
camera. That idea that we've been like transported somewhere else. and that just never stops being exciting. So even if I have a boring day, or for whatever reason it's not a show I'm particularly excited about, like I'm just always excited to be on set, quite honestly, and participating in the magic of cinema. Well, while I say that, it's funny because I'm all for, throw me down the stairs or whatever. But it's like if I get called for a job and they're like, we're gonna throw you down the stairs, I'm like, awesome, great, can't wait. They're like, be there at 4 a.m. I'm like, God damn it. And that, like, that's the stuff that I hate, or is, it's often long hours, or whatever. It's 2 a.m. You've been there since 5 a.m. It's
Ugh.
cold. You're outside in the rain or whatever. It has nothing to do with the stunts themselves, but the conditions of being on set is always just, I'm always like, that I'll reach a certain hour, and not every day is like that. I'm so
Sure.
excited for a short day. Once we're in like hour 10 or 12, I'm always just, I'm like, I hate that this takes so long, for whatever reason. And sometimes it has to be that way, and that's fine. But that is what I grumble about the most.
Yeah, I mean, that tracks, right? Everyone reaches a point of where, yeah, I'm over this shit for today, and I need to just go recharge, and I'll be back tomorrow, but I am tapped out. So I think that's just general human nature, but it is so. A lot of folks we talk to now, Lowell can maybe validate this on his experience as well, as when we talk to filmmakers and people that are working on the crew or on the set, they all say the same thing: is that the most rewarding stuff's being on set. It's just being there with everybody, making something together. So I think that, kind of, even though it does provide a fair share of frustration, it's like brings you back to that really silly saying that everyone repeats, which is like, you love what you do, you never work a day in your life. It's like, well, okay, and sure, maybe, but that's at the same time there is truth in that overly positive saying. So I'm glad to hear that. Just again, that's what drives you and keeps you going.
Yeah. I wanted to ask, who are you? And I don't know if this is accurate because I don't know IMDb. Who knows? I mean, but I think you have a pretty accurate roster. But what did you do for Purge election year?
Oh yeah, I mean, I wish I had fun stories for Purge. Purge actually, I mean, honestly, what I did was, and that's at least one where it is nice FaceTime. And at the time, I looked like this with the beard and the hair. But no, I was a guard that got shot, and it was that kind of thing. I came in for the day. It's early-ish in the film because I did go see it. It was the first like theatrical feature I'd ever done. But I came in, I got shot, I had a good time, I left. The Probably
Sounds like a
the
great
most,
Friday night. Yeah.
yeah. Oh my God, that one was, they were shooting overnights on that, so that was late. And I think it was a weeknight too, and I had like a day job desk I had to be at on like no sleep. But No, I think the more interesting story about the Purge anyway is actually how I got it, which was this. So um pre-COVID, and it was becoming a little bit of a dying art form, but stunts would, people would do this thing called hustling, and especially pre-internet this was huge, where you would essentially go to set uninvited, sometimes have to sneak past security or whomever, and then try to find the stunt coordinator, which again, like really pre-internet, I don't know how people figure that stuff out, word of mouth, I guess. And then try and find the stunt coordinator and either get a moment of their time, hand them a headshot resume, whatever. So the Purge was early, and I was living in Rhode Island at the time, and they filmed that Purge in Rhode Island, and I was like, oh my God, and I was like so excited. And I think I tried to hustle the set a couple of times. I think I went to the production office one time. They thought I worked there, and they like gave me a desk, and they were like, yeah, "This is your office," and I was like, "Oh wait, no, no, no." And
Do you
then
have to check ID?
right, yeah, I know it is. I think actually, you know what? Sorry, now I remember with this one too. Before I did that, I had the production office address, and I went, and it was unlocked, and I just like was wandering around, nobody was there, and I like took, they had like the calendar up, and I'm like taking pictures of like the schedule and stuff like that, for this reason. But then I was still trying to, but anyways, I had, what helped was eventually, I think I knew someone who was working on it, and then he let me know where they were filming one day, and I showed up, and then I went to set, and I managed, and I don't even think I did this on purpose, but I managed to catch them at lunch, which was good because the stunt coordinator and the assistant coordinator were there but like no one else was around. They weren't taking lunch, and they were just like moving mats. And I sort of did these sort of old fashioned like, "Hi, I'm here to hustle," and they were like, "You're here to hustle? Grab a mat and help us move them." And so I did,
Fair.
and so yeah, I had my headshot and everything, and they looked at the resume, and they asked, they said, "Can you take a gunshot?" They were like, "We got these mats here, let's pull them out, show us what it looks like when you get shot." And I did a couple of them. They were like, "All right." They were like, "We're in Rhode Island. There's not a lot of people in Rhode Island, and we're doing these overnights, and they're making last minute changes." They were like, "Leave your phone on. We might
Huh.
call or text you at like 2 or 4 a.m. to see when you're free." Um, there's a lot of that in general. You kind of have to have your phone on all the time, because literally not answering it in 5 minutes could mean the job went to the person who did answer their phone in 5 minutes. But
Right.
also they like needed to book people in the middle of the night. So they were like, so yeah, and sure enough, so I did that. And it's like I have so many unsuccessful hustle stories where either I just never found anybody, or I handed them in my stuff and then never heard anything, and that's just how that went. And that's just what you do. But with that one, they were like, "All right, cool, leave your phone on." And then sure enough, whatever, 2 or 4 a.m., they're like, "You available to come in tomorrow night, and work?" And I was like, "Yeah, absolutely." And then, and then I did. So like from that hustle, I had a job, in 24 hours on the first feature I'd ever done, a
Wow.
theatrical feature. So that was the coolest, most exciting part.
That was your first theatrical then.
I think so. Without like looking at my IMDb, that's gonna be my guess. I mean, stuff like Plague Town or whatever, came first. But I think it was, yeah, I think so.
That's amazing. I mean,
Yeah.
on that note, I mean, what else you got coming? Is there anything you're working on that's like in the hopper that you can talk about?
Yeah, well, I think so. Depending, it's funny. It's a weird time. It just in terms of I have a bunch of stuff that I have no idea when it's coming out, and then I feel like it's been a bit since things did just come out. I depending on when you guys air this, I like just this week was on an episode of FBI Most Wanted, and that'll be on like 2 episodes from now. So between those, I did work on the like big mystery is I worked on Salem's Lot. I don't know when that comes out or if it ever
We don't either.
does. Yeah, nobody seems to. And like I mean, I'm sure I'm not supposed to talk about it, but it's a funny thing because like I'm like, you know, it's in that limbo space where it's not officially Batgirl yet. And I thought they were heading that way when they took it off the
Right.
calendar. And then we went on strike and all the news
Right?
sources, what's
Like
that?
you filmed that years ago, right? So I feel
Yeah,
like
I think
that was kicked around a lot.
they
Schedule.
filmed it. Yeah, no, you're right. They filmed it in mass, and that was another one. That was probably like the most. This is the irony, and this is how these things work. Like that Nike commercial. I probably worked more on that movie than I've worked on any movie ever. It was, and you know, I was there plenty, and every now and then you are on a set, and you're like, "Well, this is going terrible," but that was not, that was
Huh.
not my experience on this one. Yeah, we filmed in fall of 21. That was at least principal photography. And seemed like things were going fine. And then right, and then they moved it, then they shelved it, and I said, okay, they're gonna do the tax write-off. But then they haven't done anything. And then like we had the strikes, and I thought, oh, they're gonna do it this Halloween because they're gonna not have enough
They need
content for the year.
right. Mhm.
So I'm surprised that we're where we're at now, and we still don't know either way. It's interesting too, and I mean to my point of like it didn't feel bad was even like I would get the sides, when you show up, you get the sides of you don't get the whole script, but you find out like what else they're filming that day. And I'm like reading it in the trailer and I'm just like, this sounds awesome. Like I can't
Huh.
wait to see some of these things, like some of the gags that they, talked about doing. I was like, this is great. So I mean, for selfishly for myself, I would love to just see it. I'm sure anybody who's seen like a test screening knows way more than I do about what it looks like or what's going on. But like, yeah, maybe that one's coming up.
I mean, yeah, I mean, I'm more excited for it now than I was before. Largely because I think, when you hear from someone who's working on it, that like, hey, this is, it didn't feel like it was a really bad time. And then the second time is it was, or in the second point, it was like some of the stunts seemed pretty cool. So, I mean, that's a good, I mean, at the end of the day, a good horror movie doesn't necessarily mean it's a good movie. It just means that it has stuff to keep you really engaged and entertained, along the way. So, hopefully we get to see it, we don't want the, oh, and I feel like horror is still a commodity. It always makes money. I think I think I heard they were bringing it into theaters again, but then maybe they're not. And they're going to put it to streaming. So let's let it.
They're figuring it out, or
Let us see the Salem's Lot cut.
yeah.
Right.
Does that have to do what you have to add cut now so we can Zack Snyder everything?
Right.
But well, Paul, thank you so much for sharing a little bit about kind of your work and experience. I mean, we could probably go on for hours on the questions, but we are here to talk about our topic today, which has a lot in common with your work, which is the top 5 horror stunts. And I know we talked in the beginning about how we're kind of thinking about approaching this, but as far as where we're going to start, I would love to hear, Paul, one of yours as far as like what's one of your top 5, and we don't have to be in order. These can just be 5 ones you're just really keen on. I'd love to just hear yours first.
Oh, okay, interesting. What I mean, I do want to preface it. I personally, unless you guys didn't do an order, I would love to. I think I'm methodical like you, Matt, in that I want to like work the way up.
Order, but yeah.
What's that?
When we do our top 5s, most of the time I don't go in order unless I feel the order is necessary. But I can go in order for this. But I am curious.
Yeah, I'm curious about you guys too. I'll let you know. I'm blanking all of a sudden. So I had a couple prefaces. One is that, so again, horror is not my genre. So aside from asking around and doing my own research, one thing I did was that people might not be aware of is, so there's a thing called the Taurus World Stunt Awards, which is essentially the Oscars for stunts. We don't have an actual Oscar category. Forget them anyway. And the Taurus World Stunt Awards, it's been if you go on the website, you can look up who the nominees and winners were. That dates back to the mid 2000s, I think. The award show, I think, I want to say goes back to 2000 or maybe even like 99 or something. Just
so it's pretty recent.
Well, yeah, recent compared to the others for sure. But I mean, I hate to break it to you, that's now 25 years.
I know. I mean, hard truths.
Yeah. But anyway, so I went on the website and went through all the awards and nominees just to sort of see, which I'm glad I did. And I am going to be a little nerdy in that, at least for some of them, I'm going to bring up, I like pulled up because they will give a description. The older stuff seemed like less so, but they will give a description of like, and to one of our points, they'll often say, were wires used for this? Was CGI used for this? Sometimes they'll sort of talk a little bit about how it was done. Some of that is sort of to inform the voting party on how difficult it was compared to what's. For the ones that I chose that I took from there, the description's pretty brief. Sometimes they get quite detailed into how they did stuff. So I'm going to pull from that a little bit. I think the other thing, I mean, we already talked about effects and stunts. Oh, I know what I was going to say, which I think is interesting for my list anyways, which is that, and I was discussing this with a friend, I think most of my picks are not necessarily the best horror movies. And I think it's because, to a degree, and I'm super generalizing here, it's like stunts can in many cases get better with time because athleticism sort of evolves and the technology evolves in order, that pulls you, that allows you to pull some of them off, that allows you to do things you couldn't do before. And it's like if you watch old Olympic gymnastics, it's still incredible, but it's more simple than watching, what the Olympic gymnasts do now. And I think that's different from, and I'm generalizing, there's a lot of classic stunts that are terrific, and we've talked about how practicals, practical car chases are cooler than they used to be, or are cooler than they are now, depending on, because it's less computer. And I lost train of thought on that just a little bit. But generally speaking, because again, I think with horror, something like The Exorcist or Rosemary's Baby doesn't need to be technologically advanced to expand on that story. So, the remake or the sequel isn't necessarily better, but the stunts might be. So,
Yeah.
you could be prepared for my list of not the best horror titles.
I mean, you're
No,
in good
the
company.
title has nothing to do with it. Where will you hear some of mine? But yeah, mostly like the actual stunts within them that
Yeah.
stuck out to you. And
Yeah.
I mean, when we get to me, my number 5 is pretty much this to a T. But I want to hear yours first.
Okay, yeah. So my number 5, I'll get to it. My number 5, and it is the only fight scene I have in here. I did try to vary it in terms of not just have like 5 of the best fire burns. But my number 5 is what was that, Lowell?
You gotta have a fire burn on a list like this. But anyway,
I was thinking about it and kind of looking through it, and I think horror does kind of have pretty much like the best fire burns of like any genre. If you want good fire burns, you go horror. But anyways, no, my number 5 is a fight scene, and it's the fight scene towards the end of Malignant. And and a lot of that is a little bit, it's a little less, well, it is performance, but it's also a little bit from a design aspect in that, for anybody who's not familiar and without trying to spoil the movie, but the way that character worked, she essentially had to fight backwards, and they got a contortionist. I forget her name, but she was just on the Continental as well. But they got a contortionist to figure out how they were going to do these movements where like an elbow joint is supposed to be moving opposite of what a typical elbow joint does, and how that works the fight scene. And like, I think it's just incredibly creative, and especially, I think that movie came out in like 2021, and so the idea of just like, oh my god, I've never seen anything like this before, after 100 years of cinema, just was delightful.
This was almost made my list because I thought about it and I was like, I didn't love Malignant as a movie, but I really appreciated the performance aspect of that, and hearing how that was done was, quite enlightening. So I think that's a solid pick. Lowell, what's your number 5?
going back to good stunts and bad movies, truncate what you just said, Paul. This might seem incredibly ridiculous, but I stand by it. In Jaws 3D, which is the Jaws and SeaWorld one, at the end, there's a scene where an actor is in the shark's mouth, hasn't been eaten yet, but he's like in the shark's mouth trying to open a grenade. And it just always stuck with me since I was a kid. It's one
Your
of the
cinema.
Yeah, it's like one of the craziest ideas. And like, I mean, yeah, he's not in a real shark's mouth, but he's underwater. They're filming in 3D. He's got all these bubbles everywhere, and he's got to act like he's trying not to be devoured in the shark's mouth, opening a grenade. Just wild, wild stuff, especially for a major Hollywood movie.
Is that also the one where the guy drives the jet ski into the shark's mouth, or is that a different movie?
I feel like that's Deep Blue Sea, but even now that I'm saying it, I don't think it's Deep Blue Sea, but I don't think that's.
Yeah, it's not Deep Blue Sea. It's definitely one of those. I've just seen the YouTube clip. It might not even be a Jaws sequel. It might be some other Shark Attack sequel. But
Yeah,
There
sounds
are
like a movie.
there's a great documentary on shark exploitation on Shudder, which is um I won't watch any of those movies, but I'm glad the documentary exists because that's how I can get my fix on them.
right, or that's, you watch the documentary to feel like you've watched all the movies without spending all the time.
Exactly. Or at least cherry pick the ones I do want to watch. Like, oh, okay, I'm not going to watch Ouija Shark, but maybe Sharknado 5's got some potential. So, um, well, I think for my number 5, I had a hard time ranking these, but I'm going to start with one that um was many. It's a fire burn in Maniac Cop 2, the prison scene. Um, the guy is pretty much on fire for like 10 minutes. It is an intense, I mean, and granted, it's not all one long single cut, but the amount of time this person's on fire, some of the things they're doing, they're like fighting prison inmates while on fire, they're like shooting guns. It's a lot of mobility for somebody on fire, not just flailing, because he's supposed to be the disgraced cop Matt, what's his name?
Cordell.
Matt Cordell. So like he's like zombie Matt Cordell at this point, and so he's not incapacitated by the fire. More so, it's just like now you have a flaming Matt Cordell chasing you, which is like 10 times worse than just a regular Matt Cordell. So I don't know. I think it's one of the few examples where a sequel might actually be better than the original movie, and yet somehow still maintains the thematic like undertones that made the first one subtext so important. But at the same time, it's some pretty great, stunts and Larry Cohen and what's his name,
Bill
William
Lustig.
Lustig or Bill Lustig are a good combo when it comes to writing things that necessitate really obscure, like kind of like I always think about the Larry Cohen story when he was filming V and he like dressed up like a cop, had dressed some guy like a cop and like a bunch of real cops and just hit him in there, and then you can get away with that shit, but not anymore. So yeah,
Yeah.
Maniac Cop 2 is my prison fire burn.
I'm gonna have to. I didn't come across that, and it sounds awesome. So I'm gonna have to look that up.
Maniac Cop 2 is a blast. So
It is.
it's just a great movie. But we're on to your number four, Paul. What's next on your list?
Oh yeah. So I have a couple of these, and they're cop outs a little bit. So I was as I was thinking through it. I love The Exorcist, and I was thinking about any of the levitation stuff in The Exorcist. But then I found something that, from a stunt perspective, I thought was a little better, which is when they do it in Nightmare on Elm Street, and and the cop out is that I didn't have time to watch the remake, so I can't quite decide between when they
It's
do it in the remake.
it's worse. Just whenever you're comparing the original Nightmare on Elm Street to the remake of Nightmare on Elm Street, the remake is worse. It's not the case with every single movie, but it is absolutely etched in stone for the remake. But I know the scene you're talking about.
We're talking Tina's death, right? Where
Yeah,
she gets
the
kicked
Probably
out
girl,
and
it's
thrown around. Like, yeah,
yeah.
that's a. I have to cross that one off my list now, to be honest, because but I've got backups, so I've got
Oh,
backups.
okay. All right. But I'm glad you said that, because I am curious how many we share, as a group. But yeah, no. Well, so right, I wasn't sure, again, sort of speaking about like the way that technology, enhances things. I was like, do they do it better in the remake in some way? And part of the other now, and I know you disagree, Lowell, but I'm gonna read here real quick. This is off the Stunt website. So that year they had two from the Nightmare remake, and I one of them is definitely, I don't know if it's the Tina character, but it's the same. She's
Yeah,
asleep and just.
yeah.
So it has that one where it says Freddy Krueger tosses a woman around a bedroom. The stunt woman was rigged to move around the room like a puppet. None of the walls were padded, and everything she hit was practical. CGI was used to erase cables and input the ceiling. That was Lisa Howell. Oh my gosh, I cut off whoever did this other one, so I'm gonna have to look it up. But anyways, and then another one that was nominated twice, and this is why I feel bad that I don't have the stunt woman credited from the Nightmare remake. They put it in twice, which is how you know it's good. A woman is tossed into a bedroom wall. The stunt woman does a 12-foot ratchet to a practical wall that was not padded. So that's when you get pulled on a wall, essentially by a machine, not by people, and that those things can travel you fast. So the wall's not padded, and then she falls onto a table, and then the floor, which had a 1-inch pad, CGI was used to remove the cable. And I want to say they have a category for best stunt by a stunt woman, and then they also sometimes you sort of get a sense, and part of that is to really appreciate that stunt women are not given the same opportunities as men. They don't get to double James Bond, so they want to make sure that they get acknowledged every year and don't get overlooked. But it's good, and this happens with other categories as well, because she got nominated, that second one I described, she got nominated twice, best stunt by stunt woman and just general hardest hit ever. So
Oof.
I feel like I have to rewatch the Nightmare remake to just see. And again, it's also got to be because I can't, like, rereading this, I was like, those walls were real. My God, just
If that's what you're
slamming.
taking away from doing this episode with us, I really apologize, because it's not. I even remember the scene that you're talking about. You remember how the original film is, but in the remake, it's like she's lifted off the bed by an invisible force. She moves left, she moves right. then like a slash appears and she falls to the bed, and that's it. It's like,
Oh, interesting.
it's just maybe from a stunt perspective, you can see how they did it, and you can have a greater appreciation for it. But as a viewer watching a horror movie who doesn't know this stuff, I was like, that's really freaking lazy.
Hmm.
But
I mean,
that's. But honestly, if you're able to make me appreciate the Nightmare on Elm Street remake anymore, like, you're a miracle worker.
yeah, I mean, I think it gets a bad rap because it's trying so hard to be a Nightmare on Elm Street, and that's a really hard movie to try and ape. But yeah, I even think the original Tina scene was in a padded room. Like, I think they flipped it. I think the way they flipped it up, basically built the
It was on
room
a
upside down. And like, I'm pretty sure she had a little bit more protection around her when they were throwing her around. But be surprising to know if maybe the old trick was a little bit less safe than the new, or more safe than the new one. But who
Could
knows?
be.
Well, Nolan, what's next up on yours?
Well, my number 4 is also from Nightmare on Elm Street. It's not that same one, but it's the fire stunt at the end. When Freddy's chasing Nancy around the house, she surprises him by dousing him with lighter fluid and lighting a match. And I think up until that point, it was the longest fire stunt on film in 1984, like the longest burn. Up until then, I'm sure it's been surpassed. But it's just, he is on fire for a while, and he is on fire falling down the basement steps and getting back up and running in the living room. And it's just completely crazy. And yet, even if you look close enough, you can see that at one point the makeup is just a mask, but like, it kind of has to be. But it was still very impressive. And I have to say, I don't know the names of that many stunt people, but I do know Kane Hodder and Dick Warlock, and I'm surprised neither one of them wound up on my list. But Dick Warlock's burn in Halloween 2 at the very end, when he just stumbles out, almost made it, because that is just terrifying. And I know he had to have almost died from that, because it is one take, all in camera. But going back to Nightmare on Elm Street, that always just really impressed me. Like, oh my God, they are really, really doing it, and they're not really cutting that much. So that's my number 4.
I'm gonna say, Lo, I've seen Nightmare, and for some reason, maybe just again because I'm not a horror person, it's been a while. I don't remember that, and it's weird that it didn't come up in the research. I'm surprised, and I feel like it's gonna put to shame the fire stunts I'm gonna talk about later, if it was that long one.
We'll see. But also, I think you can also find these on YouTube, so you don't have to like rent the remake. But if you watch the original again, it's like, it's at the end. He's not on fire for long, but it feels like a long time, because everything moves faster when you're on fire. But it was just very, very impressive. But yeah, that's my 4.
And Dick Warlock's just the nicest guy in the world. I met him one time and like just likes to tell stories. So I was like, oh, okay, this guy's been lit on fire a bunch of times. All right, right on. So um my next one is so it's not I if you see this scene, it's an impressive scene. It's a car flipping over scene and chase, but it's also like, well, I have like, because I know how it was made and I've kind of read about how it was made and how dangerous it was and how it, literally if one thing would have went a little differently, everyone would have died. So I think it adds kind of the allure, but it's in Phantasm, and it's the hearse chase scene, where Michael is chasing the tall man in the hearse, and I think he's in his Hemi Cuda. Um, and and at one point, like, the hearse flips over, and Don Coscarelli in his book kind of talks a lot about that stunt and how like really wildly unsafe it was, like how they were doing things they shouldn't. And again, this is the 70s, so like they're making an independent movie in Southern California that nobody knows they're making, with just people that they found for the most part, most of whom are not, union actors or union crew. So it's like
He's been too. Like, it took a
yeah.
while, because he's just getting people together on the weekend to make it. And it's like this, for an indie movie, it's kind of on a bigger scale than most, with major special effects.
Yeah, I mean, I never like no training in how to like I don't recall exactly. Like, I know they had somebody helping them with like the creation of the effect and like advise them on the stunt itself, but they're also amateur filmmakers, so it's like they don't have all the support you'd have in a big Hollywood production. from the safety side. But just knowing how close to death everybody came, I think makes the stunt really impressive because it doesn't look that way when you see it. When you see it, it looks like, oh, this is a great, it's very competent and good, but it's not like, oh wow, I thought so, looks like someone died in that. And it's also kind of the same reason why Lloyd Kaufman uses the same car flip scene from the Toxic Avenger in every single trauma movie, because it's just too dangerous to film car stunts. So he's like, I got one good one. I'm gonna put it in every single movie as like a running joke. So that's my number four. It's Phantasm.
I'm gonna have
Paul,
to
what
look that up. That one sounds cool.
Oh, Phantasm's such a great movie, but I'm so biased that I can't give you an objective opinion on it. So, um, what's the third on your list?
Number three. So this is another cop out a little bit in that I'm gonna sort of do multiples. This is where I did my Fireburn sort of. Um, but I'm gonna go with The Thing. And my cop out is kind of take your pick. There's a lot of good fire
Yeah,
burns in The Thing. If and what it where it was really for me between them is that I was having a hard time deciding. I thought the autopsy scene in the first one is good. That guy is he's on fire for a long time in the scene. It's huge. And then he walks out into the snow. I haven't seen the remake, but I did spoil it for myself by looking up, because again, here's the Taurus Awards thing. Because I don't know if this won or not, but it got nominated, which is at the end. At the end of, I think it's the end of the movie. A stuntman is engulfed in flames while trapped inside a snow tractor.
Yeah.
Prosthetic headpiece was used, and flame bars added volume to the fire. So this is one of those interesting things too. And so I couldn't decide. And part of it there was, so visually it feels very different when you watch them. And there's something about the fact that in the remake the guy is trapped in the vehicle and it's just fire everywhere that feels very claustrophobic, and you sort of putting yourself in the performer's shoes a little bit. I picture that, there would be sort of this comfort if I'm a guy on fire and I'm sort of running through a building, because it's almost like I'm running away from it, even though I can't escape it. But instead, this guy is just like seated and it's just fire everywhere, including himself. And I was just like, that just seems way more intense. I was curious because visually, and again, one of the nice things is that like fire burns often now are probably even when someone is on fire, it might be like 80% practical, and then they do 20% CGI just to make it look bigger,
sure.
while making it a little more safe. We don't have to go quite as crazy. We'll add the extra crazy in the computer safely.
Put it
So I
in
was
post.
so yeah, exactly, in post. So I was surprised when I read, because typically in the Stunt Awards they would say, like they do with the Nightmare stuff, if they use CGI and what its purpose was. So I was a little surprised to see that The Thing at least didn't say they used any CGI to enhance the flames. They did say flame bars, and I rewatched it for that, which is when sort of the effects crew will put, like fire around them that's in like a very controlled kind of way. But obviously the guy still lit up with prosthetic head, makes me think it was probably a pretty big burn. Um, I will give shout out to my honorable mention burns that didn't make it, which was parts from Freddy versus Jason, which is, there were a couple, but one of the big ones was, and again it was a Taurus Award nomination, where they when he's in the cornfield, when Jason's in the cornfield on fire. Because I think too, and it wasn't on the website when I looked it up, but I think I remember the original broadcast of the Taurus Awards where they might have given more details. And I think with that one, they were like, they had an earpiece for that guy. And they were like, move left, you're going too far to the right in the cornfield. Because he's in a cornfield and he's on fire.
They
So
can't see shit.
he can't see anything. And it was long, I think. It's one of those things where maybe I think probably the on-set burn was long, because even though you don't see him walk through the field start to finish, I assume, did that. You know, yeah.
Ugh. Well, I mean, that's a huge nightmare of just being lit on fire. But I can only imagine the elevated part of it being trapped inside something. 'Cause as you said, you can kind of stop, drop, roll when you're outside. But if you have to, right? If you're trapped
There's just like a
inside of it.
feeling like you could escape or get away from it, and I feel like you just wouldn't have that necessarily.
Yeah.
emotionally.
Lowell, what's next on your list, Lowell?
So I have to include some Sam Raimi on mine,
As
and
you
I
do.
almost did Evil Dead 2, but I went with Army of Darkness because in terms of stunts, it's just bigger and better in every
Yeah.
way. But I didn't go with Bruce Campbell. I mean, I guess he's involved in it, but the witch who does backflips and then is blown away by the shotgun. I know it wasn't all entirely in one shot, but just you're doing backflips and then like you're going back and then or rather you're in your position in the back, you're going forward or backwards, and then you go backwards again, like through a wall and taking a shotgun blast. It just seems like it's just like it looks like a simple exclamation point on a sentence, but like to add to the cartoon violence of those movies. But I know it had to involve so much like choreography, just to get that right. And it was just really cool to see when I was young, and it's cool to see now. So that's my number three.
Army of Darkness is just laden with like really fun gags.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, and I agree with you that it probably has more, not just more of them than Evil Dead 2, but their Evil Dead 2s are more like slapstick gags. It's like, let's beat the shit out of Bruce. And that's not, and like, I'm not saying that's not a stunt, but I'm like, they were doing that on purpose to beat the shit out of Bruce Campbell. So it's like they knew what they were doing. Whereas like you have like the scene where you have the mini Bruces running around and you have like the scene with the Necronomicons and like just the use of like how he uses like pushes himself against the effect. I don't know. There's a lot in there that I think is pretty awesome.
Yeah, I would. It's been a while since I watched any of them, but I would agree with you, Lowell. As someone who gravitates towards action movies, I preferred Army of Darkness because it's just way more that sort of action excitement, and the goal is different, obviously. But that hit better for me than so I think you're 100% right about that.
Army of Darkness is the gateway drug for Sam Raimi. It really is. Like it was
One of
my
my favorite drugs for horror, absolutely.
yeah. All right. Well, my number three is uh this is a take on a stunt that is like I consider this a stunt because this would terrify the shit out of me. It's Tony Todd in Candyman. And I'm sure we've all heard the story about his contract where like he got paid for every bee sting that he got because they actually put bees on him in the Candyman. So most of the time you see Tony Todd covered in bees, those are real bees. And I forget how many like extra thousands of dollars he made because I think he got, I don't remember the exact amount, but it's something like 2,500, like 5K a sting, and he got like 25 or something like that stings, which is actually a relatively low number. You think about like how many bees were on him because he had hundreds of bees on him. But
Mm-hmm.
I just found like one, he's not a stunt person, so it's like he just
Yeah.
had to like stand there and you know take it. But I even think if you are like a stunt person, it's got to creep you out, to be covered. Like if you're afraid of bugs, right? You're not. It doesn't matter how tough you are in any way. Like you're not gonna want to be covered in bees. Just that's a terrifying thought. So and deadly. Like if they all, you go my girl on that thing all of a sudden, and you got Macaulay Culkin in a casket. So although he had a severe allergy, so it's context.
I feel like personally I could handle the bees on me. It's the second one of them stung me where I'd be like, no, yeah.
Because you have to control your reaction so that the rest of them don't sting you, right? It's like,
I
no
didn't I
thanks.
didn't know I didn't know that story about his contract. That's wild and smart. My God.
Yeah, I think I don't want to misquote the facts, but I know that there was a specific amount that was agreed upon in his contract, and he's
Yeah,
talked about it openly,
that's
and
on the Blu-ray. I forget the amount too, but that's a true story.
yeah. So that's my number three. All right, we're getting down to our last two. So Paul, what's your second one?
Yeah, so my number two, I was excited about this one, and this was another Tour Swords pick. Actually, before I forget, I forgot to credit what was it? Bill Oliver, I've got my list here. Bill Oliver, I guess, did the Thing remake. I don't, the Tour Swords weren't around long enough for me to credit the people in the 70s. And I unfortunately didn't have the time to research it. But Bill Oliver did the Thing one. And then I looked it up. Tara Page did the Nightmare one where she got
The dually.
nominated twice. Yeah, hardest hit and best stunt by someone. My number two is insane to me. It's the end of the Fright Night remake, and this is another one I stole from the Taurus Awards because, and then I watched it. I was like, my God. And then and I sent it to some other stunt friends. They were like, my God, because for those that don't know, and it won I think Best Fire at the time. I'll read it. While attached together with wires, stunt people perform a double burn and are thrown around a room. Winners Chris Brewster and Mark Wagner. And for those who don't know, Chris Brewster went on to do he doubled Daredevil on the Charlie Cox stuff. He just directed a movie. It's not coming to me, but he's a big guy in stunts, and Mark as well. But yeah. So if anyone is not familiar, right? I think essentially to kill the vampire, one of them lights themselves on fire and attaches themselves to Colin Farrell, and then the two of them proceed to fly around the room on wires on fire, and you can find it on YouTube. It's insane. And it's set and from and I'm not a rigger, so I don't really know a lot of the terminology, but they definitely do a few ratchets where essentially they're, it's a machine pulling them fast and they're spinning. So it's the two guys spinning on fire together, and then they do a few shots that are a descender, which is essentially what pulls them up and down. So I mean, they go sideways a few times, they go up and down a few times. It's long. I'm sure it was complicated to design, and it's just insane to watch in a movie that I didn't see, but I don't think it was very memorable or very talked about. But I
It's
watched that
actually
show.
not
Like,
bad. It's for
yeah,
what it is, it's actually quite good. It's just very much so much like the original that it's like, well, if I'm gonna watch one of these, I'm just gonna watch the original. But you've actually given me a good reason to go back and watch it because I feel like
Yeah.
now you've given me a peek behind the curtain. So I'm like, oh man, now that must have hurt, you know? Like,
yes, yeah, and just think, it's like these guys. Yeah, they'd have all the rigging vests on, then they would get the wires would get attached, and then they would and then they'd be standing there, and then it's like, okay, now we're gonna light you on fire, and then 3, 2, 1, and stand on fire and wait till the riggers are ready, and 3, 2, 1, pull you, like, and just like based on what the rig requires, how many setups that had to be, and how often those guys probably got lit on fire, presumably to do it multiple times, to do multiple camera angles, multiple takes, and it's just it's crazy to watch too.
can't imagine the rehab after that one goes into after being in a situation like that.
Or even resetting for new takes. Like, my
Right?
God.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, again, good reason to go back and watch Fright Night. Lowell, what's your number two?
It's another vampire movie, and I knew that I wanted to pick one from this, but honestly, when I was looking back at it, I feel like you could do your own top five just of stunts from the Lost Boys because there's so many to choose from.
Right?
But I went with the where they're hanging on the bridge, the railroad scene. Paul, I don't know if you've seen it or you remember it, but like, they're vampires. They can fly, even though you don't really see them fly till the end. But like, they go to like this railroad crossing bridge, and they like jump down and hang on it. And like, as the train goes over, they're like hooting and hollering. And then one by one, they just drop into the mist. And I mean, you're hanging there all day, but to hang and then drop, but make the drop look purposeful and look like you're trying to have fun, like, that's just nuts. It's just like, to me, a great combination of filmmaking and stunt performing.
I haven't seen it, and it's funny. In like, I was like, I don't have a lot of time, and part of me was like, do I need to check the Lost Boys? And then because I knew that like they didn't fly, I thought the stunts might be sort of minimal, because of what I know about the film.
Surprisingly.
Interesting. It's on my very long watch list, so I'm gonna have to move it up and check it out.
Well, it's funny I hadn't considered it before, but now that I'm thinking about it, as you were talking about it, Lowell, it's like there is a lot with Michael, where he's getting pulled around a lot. Um, So yeah, I think it's yeah, again, it's like, we've seen the light and we kind of are like, oh, we're looking for all the stunts now, it's kind of adds to that movie experience. I tell my wife all the time, it's like I love some of these things because I get to pick out what I recognize, and that adds to the experience for me, but teach their own.
There's so though. There's one scene where a Siberian husky jumps on a guy and pushes him into a bathtub
Yeah.
full of garlic water. And even just then, you're thinking like, okay, he has to fall right. He's in full prosthetic makeup, and you got to get the dog to just like jump correctly. It's like you wouldn't think the Lost Boys would be something where you're really thinking about the stunts behind it, but it really made me consider it.
I mean, the
Yeah.
climax, right? The end of like the literal end of the movie, like has got a great, where they
Oh my
kill that
god,
lead vampire. That's a great like, and it's
Edward
a
Herman takes like a log to the stomach, and with some camera tricks, he's like holding on to it, and then he's like being pushed back into a pile of lumber, and then he explodes. When you realize there was no CG going into it, it's like that much more impressive. I want to watch it again right now. Yeah.
Lowell, you bring up a great point about the dog, because that's one of those things that like probably isn't going to make a top 10 list, but it was potentially like a logistical nightmare or required a lot of expertise. I mean, both on the dog, but also on the performer, where it's like, a couple inches to the left or the right, and we're going to have to do this all over again, while I've, in full prosthetic makeup, and that kind of thing does often get overlooked. So I'm glad you shared that.
Yeah, that's the good. I mean, sticking on the animal topic for a moment, my second one is actually from Lucio Fulci's Zombie, and is the
I
shark zombie fight, because this shit's real. Like they actually
yeah.
put some guy down there because they're Italian and it's the 70s and they're like, we don't give a shit. Like we're putting. I mean, I think the Shaw brothers and the Italian film industry of the 60s and 70s probably could go like tit for tat on like who was putting their actors in more danger. But this is such a fascinating scene because one, there's no reason for it to be in the movie. It's like so much of Italian horror films are about like I had a good idea. Now let's build a movie around a bunch of these good ideas I have.
Mhm.
And doesn't matter if they make sense or are coherent together. What matters is that they look very cool. And so when you have a scene in this, zombie island movie, and all of a sudden it's just a zombie fighting a shark, you're like, I didn't know I need to see this, but I am so glad I have. And again, it's terrifying because this guy is like genuinely like getting ripped off. This shark is biting. If I remember correctly, they did attach like pieces of meat to him and stuff like that. So like they're basically tempting the shark to like take a
And they
chunk off
drug
of him.
that hell out of the shark too, which I didn't
Yeah.
know you
Yeah, I
had
mean there
to.
was a lot of the things they would do to animals. There's a movie that came out not too long ago on Unearthed Films that called Calamity of Snakes. It was a Chinese horror movie about um, a apartment building, an apartment developer who bulldozes a ancient burial ground full of snakes, and the snakes basically attack everyone in the apartment building. And the movie has some actual snake violence, like people killing snakes. But there's also a lot of like fake snake violence, which I think is worth the price of admission. So yeah, don't hurt. I'm glad we've made progress as a filmmaking culture where we're not harming animals, but there will always be a place in history for the movies that took that risk where someone could have died doing that.
Definitely. It's funny. That reminds me of, I remember I talked about this. I'm very afraid of snakes. It's just like, no thanks. And I mean, but I was a friend of mine was working on a low budget horror movie, and he was like, "Hey, I can't make it a couple days. Can you cover for me?" I was like, "Yeah, sure. Send me the script so I can see what we're doing." And he was like, "It's very simple, but send me the scenes." And I look at it, and it's all this stuff about like this guy essentially, I think, has these like horror visions and like of snakes. And at one point, it's like, he goes to run up a staircase, and the staircase is just covered in snakes. And so I was like, okay, well, we're like low budget. So I'm sure we're just going to be rubber snakes everywhere. And I just like get there, and the AD is like walking me through everything. He's like, so we're going to have the staircase like covered in snakes. And he was like, you're not afraid of snakes, right? And I was like, what? And it was that, I mean, it was very safe because they had a snake trainer and handler there. But he's got like Tupperware container upon Tupperware container of snakes, just like got fistfuls of snakes. And he had like a couple boas and stuff. And I mean, I learned a lot, and I'm slightly less afraid watching him work now and understanding how they work. But at the time, I was like, "Oh, cool, cool. Yeah, no, I'm fine with all this."
It's so, the people that like hold on that have animals and that rent them out for this purpose, like that's a different breed of human. Because I've seen them like carrying around those like Tupperware containers with like just bugs in them. It's like, oh, what do you got? What do you want, Sonny? I've got scarabs and crabs and but so
You want tarantulas?
I got these fresh yesterday. So that's just a wild business, that being an animal handler. It's like the what's his name? Let's call him Joe
Joe.
Dirt. Joe Exotic, is that his name?
Oh,
Looks like
got
Joe
it.
Dirt. Yeah.
Looks like Joe Dirt. Yeah.
Going back to zombie for a second, when I reached out to some people, that was someone said, "Oh, the shark zombie scene in Zombie," and so I did look it up, and that is crazy. I'll have to rewatch it for the meat being picked off, but I was like, "Wow, this is something." Yeah,
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's again no reason for it to exist in the movie. It doesn't add to the narrative. It is the right, the Nagita story we were talking about, but at the same time, you take that out of that movie, not near as memorable. Um, to some, I'm a diehard, but that brings us to our last pick. So, what is your number one stunt, Paul?
well, so it's funny. Well, let me just say this. Do you mind if I go last? I kind of like to go
Sure,
last. That's
sure, yeah,
okay.
yeah.
And I'll just say that I thought, to me, it felt like there was a clear first place, undeniably. But all our picks have been so different that I'm very curious to hear what you guys have.
You're making me nervous because you're making me think that because the one I picked for my number one is like, there's no way that this isn't anyone's number one because
Right.
it's one of the most amazing, like, see, so I'm Lowell, why don't you
Oh,
go first? I'll go second.
All right. I'll jump on that bullet. So this, honestly, now that it's
sorry, Lowell, let me cut you off. It's no judgment because obviously it's all subjective. But
Sure.
yeah, yeah.
well, it was tough, and honestly, even now I can't even say this is definitively the best stunt in history, but it goes on for so long, and it might seem like such an easy answer for someone who doesn't even consider stunts in movies, but honestly, Zoe Bell in Death Proof, like, holy hell. Going back to Malignant for a second, when she shows up as a background character in the jail cell, I just started hooting and hollering. I was like, because you don't know, James Wan doesn't telegraph what's going to happen next in that movie. But as soon as you see Zoe Bell, you know that it's going down. And man, just Death Proof art, it's a good movie, but arguably the least in the lowest ranked Tarantino film for me anyway. But man, the what is it? The shit maiden, the God, I forget what it's called. The Maiden's Head or Ship's Mast. When they're doing Ship's Mast and she's actually on the car, and like you've got the stunt driver like banging into them, and you know it's Quentin Tarantino and you know it's Zoe Bell, so you know it's real and in camera, is just like, it's so stressful and so exciting the entire time. And it's like a third of the movie. It's like he wrote a movie around the excuse to make this, which is why it might not be his best movie, but still, it is like, oh my God, look what human beings can do in camera. And that's why it's my number one.
Well, that's without ruining anything, that's not my number one, but that is an awesome pick. I think I think that was my favorite stunt of the movies that came out that year. And I think, Matt, I think when something you said when you're talking about The Thing, I think we were just sort of talking about what the experience is like for the person. I find there's no way that you can't watch that Death Proof scene and think about what
Oh
that
yeah.
person feels like on top of a moving car. Like you don't feel like you're in a fantasy land. You feel
But
like
it's
you're
going fast. Like it's
right.
going as fast as it says it's going.
Yeah. The only reason that's probably, and now I'm not sure that my number one is better than that. The only reason I don't have it was because you might, in theory, debate if Death Proof counts as horror, and I sort of went a little more horror-y is all. But no, otherwise it's a fantastic pick, Laura, and I'm so glad you had it instead of the same as mine because everything you said is true. It's awesome.
I mean, it is easily the best thing about that movie is like I mean, it is the focal point of the movie. So it's like to say it's the best thing about it is almost like saying, yes, the point of the movie works very well, but it's also just impressive. That level of stunt work. Mine, again, what I thought was an obvious choice here is like Final Destination 2's car pileup scene. Like this to me is like pure mayhem, chaos, and like of course it's a series of things that happen and multiple shots to make it, but there are parts in that where there is lots of cars throwing themselves over each other in very violent ways. And going back to like that sentiment of like, when you see something on screen that kind of taps into that reality moment and it really touches you, like no, there is a certain group of age ranges that will not drive behind logged fucking
Oh yeah,
18 wheelers
you just don't do it. You just
because
you
of
get
that movie.
and you let it go far away. No, 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 never.
Like I think that the orchestra of chaos that like happens in that moment, I
Mhm.
can't imagine how difficult it is to not only try and get that to look a certain way, but also knowing that you don't have an infinite amount of chances to do it. I would imagine that car crashes and blowing up cars and things of that, even if you're getting junkers, still cost money and it's expensive and they're not an infinite resource. So I just found that whole thing to be, and the Final Destination movies are quite good at like taking reality and making it feel like horror. But I think that one to me always felt like the realest one because I grew up in the I-10 in Arizona, which was notorious for having tons of like accidents on it, especially during like monsoon season. So yeah, Final Destination 2 to me felt that car pileup scene just felt untouchable as far as like impressive levels of chaos and cooperation.
So my number one pick is also the car pileup in Final
No
Destination 2.
shit.
Oh
Yeah, because
really?
and yeah, well, absolutely, and for a number of different reasons. But and I don't want to repeat anything Matt said, which was all 100% true. I mean, I don't know what they had for resources. I didn't look at the behind the scenes. But like, yeah, I mean, there's so many good things about it, and one, I mean, because I was looking at some car crashes and some very impressive ones, but I was like, man, they crash so many in this one, and they're so different, and like, because I mean, the log goes through one of them definitely, I think, flips over the top, and
You have
I'm
a
now
car
trying to go.
sliding into someone
Yeah,
who's like,
car slides into somebody.
yeah,
Right, right. And doesn't a car also maybe slide into a log that's now in the street? It's one of the last ones. A guy slides a motorcycle.
Yeah, there's a
Um,
cop. There's a cop motorcycle, I
yeah,
think, that like gets
yeah.
taken out.
And so yeah, and yeah, exactly. There's just so much going on. And then like to further the point, so some of the interesting things, and I didn't look up all the credits, but is the Final Destination 2 is directed by David R. Ellis, who I think he did at least one other Final Destination. He did Snakes on
in
a
the fourth
Plane.
one, which isn't great, but that's okay. We love him for part two.
Right,
Yeah.
right. And I mean, I'm sure they brought him back for 4 because of all the love that part 2 gets. But so David also comes from Stunts. If you IMDb him, it's whatever. It's like a dozen, director credits, and then a couple hundred stunt and second unit director credits. And I think that's a big reason why it looks so good. And it also comes at an interesting time because I think it's 2003 or
Yeah.
thereabouts. And then you get and it's all one thing I really liked. It's all very clear, and I think that was very important for the story because obviously they're going to retrace the order of what happened and who should have gone when. But so it was important for the audience to understand this happens to this person, which causes this to happen, and so forth. And shortly thereafter, we start getting the Bourne films, where at least it gets very chic and popular for a while to do the really quick cuts when we're doing
Yeah.
anything exciting. And I'm not trying to knock that, but that just got very popular, and this was like right before it. So it's got
Yeah.
a lot of 2000s aesthetic, but none of that aspect. So you can still, everything is very clear. Like when the guy falls off the motorcycle, and I want to say, and I only watched it once, that he's the guy who gets hit by a car
Yeah,
later
he
because that's
slides
why
for
he's
a
there.
while.
Right, he
Yeah.
slides for a while, and that's the thing. Every shot, every car flip is not, you know, 5 different cameras and 5 different cuts and you only see it turn a corner. It's just, you just watch the car flip over
Yeah.
and then they cut to a different car getting wrecked. Like I really loved the clarity of the scene amidst, while still what you said, it's also chaos. But you can follow all of it. And I feel like probably a director who is not a stunt director. I mean, it might have been directed by second unit anyways, because it's a stunts in a car crash. But I feel like if you hired a director who is not familiar with stunts in action, that scene would not have come out as well as it did.
I mean, you have like what's his name? Like, Andy Serkis, right? Who obviously is big in the stunt world and now goes into directing, and you can tell. And like, there's some of the movies they're doing or have more. There's more going on. I'm also thinking of I don't think the guy who did the guy who did the John Wick movies or any of them come from
Oh yeah,
stunts as well? Yeah, he
oh
did.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Both of
yeah,
them. That's the Hell's the End, David Leitch.
Yeah.
yeah.
So, I mean, I think like you're right. Like you can tell when people have that. I mean, what's it? Gareth, who did the raid?
Gareth Edwards, yeah.
Yeah, Gareth Edwards. I mean,
Evans, sorry. Gareth
Evans,
Edwards.
I didn't say anything because I also get them. I get them confused all the time in my head. And I was like, oh, I can't look it up to check.
I know it's a Gareth. That's all I know is
It,
but that those kinds of like crunchy, what's that? It's like Salat. Is that the martial arts style that they use? Like Salat. It's like
yeah,
that stuff is just insane. And I'm so glad that we're getting a return to like crunchy action cinema. And you're right, you mentioned the quick cut thing, Paul, and I'm glad you did because that was such a disservice, I think, to because you still get the stunt, right? But at the same time, the way you're viewing it doesn't it takes away the appreciation of the coordination, right? Like I love the most recent, this is so off topic, but the recent John Wick movie, right, where they had that scene that was a top-down perspective that was pulled
Oh,
directly from a
yeah.
video game. And I'm like, I know that this is like I know that we're at reached a point in cinema where like my eyes are gonna lie to me about what's real and what's not, like what's actually being done in real life and what's being added CGI. But the way in which that blended together lends itself exactly to what the inspiration was, which was from a video game, the Hong Kong Massacre, which has that top-down martial arts beat 'em up experience. So I'm just glad we're at a point now where like stunts are coming back to it's almost like practical effects. They went away in favor of this new medium, and now we're realizing that we're better together than we are kind of picking sides.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
so this has been a blast. I mean, Paul, thank you, and Lowell, thank you for introducing Paul to this pod vlogcast. I don't know what we call it. We just do YouTube, just this YouTube channel on the internet. But Paul, thank you so much for being here.
Yeah,
thank you for having me, guys. Thank you, Lowell. Thank you guys for having me because I was just, yeah, this was a ton of fun to like get ready for, and then obviously a ton of fun to do. And now it's going to be a ton of fun after when I look up Maniac Cop 2 and Phantasm and Jaws 3D and stuff.
Oh, you'll have fun with Jaws 3.
Watching schedule.
Right.
Long
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, and Lost Boys. Yeah. I try to keep, I'm going to have to watch the episode because I've been trying to keep a tally in my head.
There's a part of me that's thought about like I need to start writing these things down and putting them in the show notes somewhere. So maybe this is the impetus to do so. So
There you go.
again, Paul, it's been a blast. I hope, anytime you ever want to come back and chat about stunts, movies, horror, whatever it is, I'm sure we'd love to have you again. And without further ado, be good, stay safe, and watch more horror movies, everyone.
Peace.
Adios.